What is up guys, MKBHD here, and yes, this laptop does cost and did cost me $6,700. And right off the bat, you probably should not upgrade to this 2018 MacBook Pro if you already have a 2017 or even a 2016 MacBook Pro. And it's not even really because of the price. But yeah, so this laptop did cost obviously a ton more than most other laptops or even most other desktops. But the real story is that this is the most powerful new laptop Apple's ever made. It's the new 2018 8th Gen Intel Core i9 15-inch MacBook Pro. And this is everything you need to know about it. So first of all, here are all the new specs. This is the new 8th Gen Intel Core i9, 2.9 gigahertz, 6-core CPU. There's also a less powerful version, but every single new 15-inch MacBook Pro now has a 6-core chip, which is dope. It has an AMD Radeon Pro 560X with 4 gigs of video RAM. That's the highest end GPU option. Has 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM, up from the baseline 16 gigs, and a 4 terabyte internal SSD, up from the baseline 256 gig. So yeah, this thing's clearly a beast on paper, but there are also a couple other things that are technically new also about this laptop that are more minor, but that are also worth noting. Number one is the new True Tone display. So it's everything we knew and loved about the old MacBook Pro displays, but this time it adds the ambient light color temperature sensor so it can dynamically adjust the white balance of the display based on the room you're in. This is cool on a smartphone and even on tablets, but I turn this off immediately, and I suspect a lot of other video editors or photographers will do the same thing. But interestingly enough, the touch bar is now also a True Tone display, and it will match. So whenever the main display changes color temperature to match the room you're in, the touch bar will match and change temperature too. So that's pretty cool. The keyboard is also slightly updated. It will look nearly identical from the outside except for a slightly different option key. Not sure why that's different, but it is. But they're calling this a new butterfly mechanism that's a bit quieter than previous generations. Basically, for those who don't know, Apple has had some reliability problems with the MacBook Pro keyboard in the past couple years. I actually haven't personally had any problems with mine, but I've read about a lot of this, which is people having, dust and dirt and things like that getting under the keys and breaking it. So teardowns have revealed that with this generation, Apple has added a bit of a membrane under each keycap to prevent debris from entering, and it happens to have the effect of slightly dampening the noise and feel from the keyboard. So I can feel the difference when I type on them back to back, but honestly it still feels like a normal low travel MacBook keyboard. It's not game changing. I would take more travel if I could get it. And then what's also new is the T2 chip. So last year's machines had the T1 chip, as you probably remember, and you got Touch ID, things like that. The new custom T2 chip has a bunch of other improvements and benefits, things like improved encryption and secure boot. But one of the most interesting user-facing features that you get from it is Hey Siri. So now there's a new always on, always listening Hey Siri feature, which I don't even know what you would do with Siri very often on the desktop. Maybe turn your screensaver on or open some folders or something like that, I guess.
Here's what I found on the web for what you would do.
Hey Siri, open my downloads folder.
Here's that folder. Good stuff in there.
Please make Siri better. Anyway, those, like I said, are pretty minor things. What I'm really concerned about with this new laptop and what I'd be paying for is the new specs, the new performance, and that's what's going to decide if this laptop is worth the extra money and upgrading. So the new 6-core i9 is new at the highest end, and I'll talk more about that as far as render times and processing power and what that's useful for, but that's a welcome upgrade. The RAM, as you heard me mention, is now faster DDR4 versus last year's DDR3. And while I almost never use the 15-inch MacBook Pro on battery power, Apple did acknowledge that they wanted to maintain battery life, so they bumped up the size of the internal battery just a little bit to keep the same claimed 10-hour battery life rating with the less efficient DDR4 memory. So now it's faster. And this 4 terabyte SSD, or any size really, is literally the fastest internal drive I've ever seen in a laptop. I mean, I'm seeing nearly 3 gigabyte per second reads and writes, which is incredible. And you probably have already heard it's slightly controversial because it's so expensive, but pro tip, if you don't upgrade to spend the $3,000 on a 4 terabyte internal drive, you can get the exact same MacBook Pro as far as performance in a $3,000 machine. So clearly, it's just kind of clickbait. But the thing about a drive this big, number one, it's hard to think of, to name another high-end laptop right now with a 4 terabyte internal SSD. That's a big drive. And number two, you really just get a lot as far as convenience, or I'd call it peace of mind, of having a big drive. Having a 4 terabyte drive on your mobile workstation, I said this in my Q&A, if you work with big files like I do, you need a big drive to have all of those things in one place without external hard drives and things sticking out of your laptop. I think I could personally get away with having just the 2 terabyte option on mine, just because pretty much every project I do is less than that, but having a 4 terabyte option is great. You just probably don't need it. You may have heard about the thermal problems with this, specifically this i9 15-inch MacBook Pro. Some have called it overheating, some have called it throttling, just generally the thermal problems. So let me break that down. Generally, Apple loves thin, quiet laptops, basically to a fault. They love being thin and sleek and quiet so much that they would rather throttle down the CPU a bit than kick up the fan speed to keep it cool. So like if I told pretty much any company in the world, look, you gotta make the highest end, most impressive workstation laptop you can with a big screen and big internals, you probably picture something with huge vents, you know, this big thick chassis, maximum performance, fans cranking. You're only gonna match a desktop by making a big laptop. Then Apple comes along and their most powerful laptop is this thin unibody aluminum enclosure. It's very different. You definitely do get phenomenal build quality. I mean, this thing feels like a tank. It's rigid, it's dense, it's sharp and clean, but it also means not as much airflow. These fans are smaller, these vents are smaller, and just overall thermal design could be a lot better. And then on top of all of that, since Apple wants its laptops to be as quiet as possible all the time, even though they don't have to be in pro machines, but since they want that, instead of ramping up the fan speed to cool off the laptop when it's getting warm, they throttle down the CPU so they don't have to ramp the fans up as high. That's the problem. That's what's led to people trying all kinds of things like sticking the laptop in the refrigerator to get it to cool properly and doing all kinds of tests with all these different apps and benchmarks to see how much it throttles. I actually decided to do my own test because I really rely on these MacBook Pros for one thing and one major thing only, and that's mobile video editing with Final Cut Pro. So the iMac Pro at the studio is a beast. Zero complaints from me there. Fast edits, fast exports. That's my slightly unfair benchmark. When I go mobile, when I go to like CES or some event where we're shooting a video and we need to have that laptop there, that's when I will bring the highest end Final Cut Pro machine that I can, which is now this i9 MacBook Pro. And I actually can edit 4K, even 6K and 8K red raw footage on the MacBook Pro at this point. There's a lot more dropped frames than the iMac, of course, but I typically bring the whole project to internal storage since it's so fast. And then the fast RAM and storage help me chop through and scrub through the timeline, play through media, and work through everything relatively easily. It's when I finish the project and hit the render button that things change and just take forever. It takes these laptops forever to render out videos and transcode all these R3D 8K raw files into 4K ProRes for the timeline. That's really where the bottleneck is and where it takes forever. So I might as well hit render and like go get a meal, go to sleep, wake up the next day. It's that long. So basically with the extra cores and the higher clock speeds and the improvement of the architecture of the new chips, I'm hoping to see an improvement there. So I did my own test in my normal use case for a video. I shot a 3-minute sample test clip on Red, 8K, 8:1 compression, dropped it on the timeline with background rendering off, and just timed an export of that timeline. Keep in mind, it's a super simple clip, obviously, but with a longer project with LUTs and effects and transitions and many more clips to transcode, the difference would be exaggerated between all these machines. But anyway, for transcoding and exporting, this is my results. I did this on the iMac Pro and I got a final export time of 6 minutes, 53 seconds. Pretty good. The 2017, so last gen MacBook Pro I've been using, did it in 25 minutes, 38 seconds. And the new MacBook Pro here did it in 21 minutes, 21 seconds. So there you go. I mean, I might not see a huge difference as far as like the timeline and scrubbing through media and editing and making the thumbnail and all that stuff, but when I hit render, it will be 15% faster. So yes, technically I'm getting the faster laptop I wanted here by a bit, but when you translate that out to like the bigger projects, that means I'm gonna go from rendering in like 3 hours maybe to 2.5. But again, keep in mind, that's just my situation, and there is much more testing going on out there with other variables that might be closer to your situation. So you might be 4K or 1080p. You might be not red footage, maybe Sony footage, or maybe Arri footage. You might be in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro. So there's a whole bunch of other different variables. For that, I'll give a shout out to my buddy John over at the TLD Today channel, where he's doing, he's been tweeting his results for all of these tests as he goes through them, but he's putting together a video that will have all of that in one place. So I'll link to that if I can. Hopefully that's live around the time this one is. Probably is by the time you're watching this. But for me, personally, for the exact way that I will use this laptop, it's just barely worth it. Like, I'm gonna keep it because I already have it, but for someone, again, who already has a 2017 MacBook Pro or already has a 2016 machine that's already high-end, you're probably, because of the throttling and because of the slight limit in performance, not really gonna need to spend the money on this one. At this point, it feels like Apple could probably get a bigger boost of performance out of actually changing and updating the MacBook Pro's design than just putting new chips in it. Maybe we should actually start asking Apple for thicker Pro laptops. Anyway, the point here is tread carefully, spend wisely, and I think for a lot of people, the smart move is gonna end up being to skip this great laptop and wait. But either way, that's been it. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.